I want to welcome you back to Satan's Trilogy. This is Book 3, Chapter 4 starting. And I am the author and the narrator. This will be reading 91. Sit back, relax, and let the story unfold. Sunday morning, Esther was up early as usual, nearly 2 hours before Day woke up. Breakfast was nearly ready when Aunt Brandy and Dave both entered the kitchen. They could hardly wait to see what Esther had prepared. And they would not be disappointed. The table was ready with Belgian waffles, Polish sausage, and some scrambled eggs with bits of bacon in them, and of course some toast. The place settings were equally as impressive, with some crystal for water and juice. The coffee was still brewing, but the aroma was already thick in the air. Brandy and Day both moved to Esther, giving her a good morning hug, and almost simultaneously they asked if this was a special occasion. Esther grinned. "It is," Esther responded. "I thought we should have a special breakfast celebrating for Day's winning the cross-country race." Esther jumped up and down just a bit and explained they finally sorted through the film of the finish line. "It is official. You beat out everyone." She then added, "And there was a 6-way tie for second because they couldn't be certain with you blocking a clear view of the others." And Brandy squealed, then hugged Day. "I thought you had won. I don't know why they couldn't see it." Brandy was hugging Day, lifting her off her feet and turning her in a circle. Brandy finally sat her down. "Oh, this is so exciting. You girls flew over the lane like birds. You were so fast." Esther said, "And Amy, Helen, Chris, Eve, Raven, and Terry all tied for second." "Wow," said Day. "Running hard all year really paid off." Esther smiled, "And we all beat the old girls' record." They said everyone from Grant High had crossed the finish line ahead of the old record. "I think this new record will last a long time." Esther smiled at Day and added, "That's your record." Leaning forward, Esther hugged Day as she quickly said, "Let's eat." Day chuckled, "You read my mind." And Brandy repeated the thought, "And mine." Brandy sat at her usual place at the table, noticing Esther had placed some newspapers close by. "Esther, do they have Day's name in the paper?" Esther grinned. "Day's name is in all the papers. I went out this morning and picked up the Chicago 3 majors and 2 minor papers. They are all talking about the girls from Grant High." Everyone had filled their plates with some food and started to eat. Esther added, "I circled some of the more memorable quotes." Esther grinned. "Seems like Grant High is now Chicago's new inspiration. We are Chicago's pride." Day was sipping her coffee, then spoke. "I have seen our entire school change overnight. Seems like a miracle. Esther said, "Does seem like a miracle." The girls had become comfortable wearing their nighties in the morning at the breakfast table. Brandy had a large white shirt on with some white panties. Day had a black silk nightie and a pair of silk panties, and Esther was wearing soft white trousers with a loose-fitting soft blue silk top. Brandy pulled her right leg up and under her left leg while asking Esther, "Have you seen many miracles?" Brandy seemed relaxed, leaning back for Esther to respond. Esther grinned, and while studying her aunt, and laughed and said, "I have seen 3 miracles in my life. That is one for every 6 years that I have been alive." Esther turned to Day. "I am a very lucky person to have seen 3 miracles. What we have seen at Grant High is truly wonderful and very special, but it doesn't come close to the miracles that I have witnessed." Then Esther quickly switched subjects. "I told Raven that we would pick her up this morning, so we need to start moving. Dad's expecting us at 6. Day said, "Awesome, let's hurry. Is Riley Grace coming?" Esther responded, "Raven wasn't certain, but I doubt you could keep her away." Esther was clearing the table and quickly added, "My guess is that Riley Grace will be joining us in the Escalade." Day smiled. "Well, let's hurry then. I love them too and want to hear what they have to say this morning." Aunt Brandy had quickly moved beyond the talk about miracles, placed her dishes on the countertop for Esther to load into the dishwasher, and said, "You two have a great day. I am off to the shower. I volunteered to work today." Aunt Brandy gave both a hug before disappearing down her side of the apartment. As they pulled the Escalade in front of Raven's home, Raven and Riley Grace both came out of the front door and quickly ran to the car. Jumping inside of the car, they both seemed excited and said good morning to Day and Esther. "Day," said Riley Grace, as she gave her a kiss on the cheek before flopping into her seat, "you are famous." Riley Grace giggled as she opened her newspaper that she had brought with her. Raven quickly added, "She is right, Day. You are the best of the best." Raven laughed. "That is what Chicago Sun-Times says, and they are never wrong." Day smiled. "I guess this is my 2 minutes of fame." Day laughed hard. "In a week, all of this will be forgotten." Esther quickly spoke up. "I don't know about that, Day. I think your 2 minutes of fame just might follow you around for a while." Riley Grace had the newspaper open and started to read. Like a dark and ominous shadow of a storm cloud above, flowing across the landscape, they were moving as one, indistinguishable from one another. The entire group of runners from Grant High quickly approached the finish line, and like a bullet they all passed the finish line, shoulder to shoulder, and within inches of each other. It was only after several hours of studying the video footage that it was determined Day-Ho had led their teammates to a victory. Raven spoke up. "And you were out front every bit of the way." Raven smiled. "I really tried to pass you, but you had only one speed, and that was always slightly more than mine." Time flew as the girls giggled and talked about the race and quotes from the newspapers. One paper called Day faster than a bullet. The girls really giggled over that. Another article said that Day had led a tornado over the finish line. Another reporter wrote, I thought Day Ho was perhaps one of the most attractive female runners that I had ever seen, but as I looked at her teammates, I noticed each and every runner was very attractive and held themselves in a manner exuding that of a champion. And so I must say, Day Ho is a champion of champions. Riley Grace giggled. I really like that comment the best. Arriving at Chin Ho's grocery store, they parked towards the rear of the parking lot, leaving the closest parking spaces for the customers that would arrive after the store opened. Everyone jumped out and walked towards the front of the store. As they approached, the lights came on inside of the store. Mr. Ho had just unlocked the door to start the day. Business hours for the grocery were 6 in the morning till midnight, and that was 7 days a week, all year long. Raven and Riley Grace entered the store first. Riley Grace ran up to Mr. Ho and gave him a hug. She had become very fond of him over the last few weeks. And Mr. Ho thought a lot of Riley Grace and Raven. Raven followed her sister and gave Mr. Ho a hug and a good morning greeting. They quickly followed and hugged her father. Good morning, Father. Did you have breakfast? Mr. Ho quickly responded, Perhaps I'll go down the street in a little while and have something at the diner. Esther walked up, bowed to her father, and gave him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Day and I brought you some breakfast. I used your waffle iron this morning and your famous Jamaican coffee. Esther placed a medium-sized insulated carrier on the counter and said, I hope you are hungry because Raven said this is the best breakfast she has ever had. I would love to have your comment on it too. Esther smiled as she placed the carrier on the counter and pushed it slightly towards her father. Mr. Ho smiled. I am hungry. You girls know what to do. I received fresh produce an hour ago in the back. I'll go to my office and enjoy this breakfast while you take care of the store. Mr. Ho smiled and grabbed the insulated bag of food and went to the office. Raven and Riley Grace went to the back of the store and found the fresh produce and brought out to the front as much as they could and started to replenish the displays. Day was in the meat section taking inventory on what needed restocked, and Esther started to count the cash register money to be certain it held the correct amount. The girls worked in the store until noon when Mr. Ho's regular workers showed up and relieved them. Mr. Ho had some very reliable, hard-working workers that he could depend on. He was now able to step away from the store during the day, leaving it in the hands of his trusted employees. Mr. Ho smiled at the four young women. Riley Grace held her own in maturity, and so Mr. Ho thought of her as one of their equals. So where are you lovely ladies going for the rest of the day? They quickly answered her father, I think that I'll tag along with Esther and see where that leads me. Raven spoke up. Esther has offered us a chance to do some off-road biking. Riley Grace wants to learn how to handle a motorcycle. Mr. Ho smiled and hugged each girl. How can one man be so lucky to have four wonderful young women in his life? You girls are a blessing to me. Mr. Ho then added, Enjoy yourselves and I will see you later. Smiling, he turned to check out a customer. Mr. Ho added as he left, Riley Grace, be careful and enjoy yourself. Arriving at Esther's cousin's cycle shop, Kaoyan, each gave each girl a off-road bike and showed them the path on a map. The trail was behind the shop. Riley Grace quickly studied the map and said, "I am ready." Giving a big smile, Riley Grace said, "I have watched a few YouTube videos on off-road biking, and I think I am ready." Everyone laughed and agreed. "Let's ride then." Esther suggested, "First, let's ride to the far end of this acreage and back. This will allow us to become familiar with the bikes before hitting the trail." Several hours later, everyone was exhausted and had experienced some of the best trail riding ever. With the bike riding over, Raven suggested she and Riley Grace spend the day with Esther and Day. Riley Grace had just had the greatest day of her life, as she put it, and wanted to stay with Esther and Day. Esther glanced at Day, got a quick nod of approval, and said, "Sounds like the four of us are on the road for the day. I want to see my German friend Axel Buller and his brother Otto. Then go to my uncle's restaurant. He has promised to give me a few lessons in the kitchen. We all have some defense lessons later, and then we'll stop by the store again to see how things are going before going home for some dinner. I planned a special lesson tonight for everyone." Esther smiled and giggled. "I thought we might be spending the day together." Everyone jumped into the Escalade and buckled up, excited to experience the rest of the day. "You remember how to get to Axel's house, Day?" asked Esther. "You bet," said Day. "I was only there once, but they do have a very memorable house in the old German district. It is just beautiful." Day paused for a moment. "Should I ever win the lottery, I would love to own a house like that. It has history and character." Esther laughed. "I really like their house too, but my dream home would be a modern home on the Atlantic. A minimalist house with large doors that would allow the sound of the waves into the rooms." Raven laughed and said, "All right, both sound great, but I think I'd like to be in a condo, downtown Chicago, and high above the city." Raven laughed again. "I am a city girl and proud of it." Riley Grace quickly spoke up. "All right, they all sound nice, but one of my happiest memories was at the beach when I was only 6 years old. Mom was still alive. We had a lot of fun squeezing our toes into the sand. The sun was warm." Riley Grace paused and looked about at the three girls in the car, then added, "I think that the beach is for me." She then giggled. "That is when I win the lottery." Everyone laughed and made comments about the lottery and the future as Day pulled up to the gate in front of the Buller home. They lowered the driver's window and rang the intercom. The gate immediately opened and they drove on up the drive. Stopping in front of the house, Axel Buller and his brother both immediately were coming out of the front of their home with large smiles on their faces. They were obviously very happy to see Esther, and equally as happy that she had brought her sister and two friends. Axel quickly spoke excited. He raced to welcome Esther to their home, speaking in German. "Esther, my little saint, it is so wonderful to see you and your sister Day. Plus, you have brought 2 more young ladies. This is really wonderful. It has been too long since your last visit." Esther hugged Axel and thanked him for the warm welcome. Otto had stayed close to his brother, smiling and agreeing with Axel on everything he said. Esther noticed that Otto certainly seemed to have mellowed since their first encounter. Otto quickly added, "Yes, and we have prepared a light lunch for the city's next chef sensation." Esther moved to give Otto a hug and said, in German, "I love your positive thinking. If you can visualize it, then it can happen." Esther laughed and gave Otto another hug, and then switched to English and quickly introduced everyone she had with her. They and I have with us our very best friends, Raven and Riley Grace. Esther seemed to almost boast as she moved her right arm and pulled each girl closer to her as she gave their names. Raven goes to Grant High with Day and I, and Riley Grace will be a freshman next year at Grant High. Esther hadn't mentioned that they were sisters, and so Riley Grace spoke up. "Raven and I are sisters, and Esther and Day are the greatest friends anyone could ever have." Axel put his arm around Riley Grace as they walked slowly to the far end of the house. "Tell me, Riley Grace, do you speak German?" Riley Grace responded, in German, "I am a student of the German language. I am not yet proficient with the language." Axel smiled, and he looked at the young girl's golden hair and blue eyes. You know, Riley Grace, German is a strong language. I sense that you will quickly learn it." Raven and Day were stunned with the German response that Riley Grace had made, while Esther didn't seem a bit surprised. "Here we are." Axel opened two sliding doors that exposed the main dining room. The old mahogany table could hold 18 people, and at the near end it was full with lunch meats, cheeses, and breads. "We held off having lunch so that we could all enjoy a meal together," said Axel. Otto quickly spoke. "The breads are made by a wonderful baker not too far from here, but the meats and cheeses all come from Germany, and please try the mustards. I think they are the best in the world." No one had eaten for over 6 hours, and the girls were all hungry and impressed with the selection of food on the table. "This is beautiful. I haven't seen such a wonderful arrangement of German food for nearly 3 years. Esther smiled. "Dad and I were in Germany after he took care of some business. We went to Bavaria, and I found hundreds of cheeses to choose from. I love the Edinburgh cheese." Otto spoke up. "Well, let's fill our plates. Axel and I wanted to enjoy this meal with all of you." Riley Grace was not bashful and quickly grabbed a plate, made 2 sandwiches with different cheeses and meats, used different mustards, and on each end of the bread, and said, "I am ready to explore the culinary feast." She laughed and moved up the table, sitting down and pouring herself a glass of water from one of the many pitchers of iced water. Dad followed Riley Grace, Raven, and Esther, watched them, looked at each other, giggled a bit, and grabbed a plate. Axel and Otto quickly followed the girls, filled their plates with sandwiches larger than the girls had taken. Then they both took seats at the end of the table alongside of Riley Grace and Day. Axel adjusted his seat and said, "Please enjoy." Okay, I'm going to stop there. That was the chapter 4 and reading 91. Hope you enjoyed it. So until next time, please be safe and take care.